Welcome to this webinar on shaping the future of education. My name's John Besant, and I'm going to try and act as a host, a facilitator, a guide. I have my two guests, Jörg Lieber and Carsten Neber, who are going to help particularly with the content. But basically what we'd like to try and do today is start a conversation. And we might want to carry this on in the future, but at least make a start around this hugely important question of shaping the future of education around innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. So what I'd like to do is, before I introduce my colleagues in greater depth, just set the scene. So I think nobody would be here who didn't believe that innovation matters. Of course it does, it always has done. It's all about survival and growth, blah, blah, blah. But it's much more than that. We're living through a pandemic, and we certainly aren't through that yet. And that's required huge amounts of innovation, sometimes in very unexpected directions. Behind the scenes, we've got COP going on, COP26, talking about the future of our planet, not just some trivial side affair. This is possibly life or death. So once again, the key message that's coming out there, we need innovation. And pretty much wherever you look in the commercial world, as much as in the public sector or in the social world, innovation matters, of course. But that raises a question. If it's so important, then we need to think about the skills that enable that to happen. And the skills, of course, are essentially built around three key elements. There's the idea of creativity, coming up with ideas. There's the idea of innovation. My working definition of innovation, it's creating value from ideas. Commercial or social, it's value from ideas. It's not just ideas. And entrepreneurship is the act, the individual and team efforts that actually make all that happen. It's enabling change. As Peter Drucker memorably put it, innovation is what entrepreneurs do. But I would like to add to that, they do it in many different contexts. And in fact, what we're seeing these days is a growing conversation which more or less says, actually, we all need to learn these skills of creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. It's not enough to leave this now to the specialists in our organizations. The problems are just too big. There's so many of them. We need the kind of life skills that innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship represent. And that's not just me, in my opinion. We can see this happening in many countries at a political level. We see it in many companies. We see it in all sorts of activities that really suggest we're now talking about, from the kindergarten right through to the old age picture, learning and practicing these skills, which opens up a huge question. How? How do we transmit and enable people to acquire and develop these skills? And that's where I can plug in the commercial, because the background you can see for me is all about vision. And for those of you who've not yet come across it, the Vision Project is an attempt to try and look at this question. How might we enable the skills development around innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship? And particularly, what might that pattern look like over time? And so the Vision Project, bringing together companies, universities, policymakers, many different players, the project has been looking at the future, 2030. What is it going to look like? And what's the journey towards that going to involve? It's been a fascinating process, nearly 200 interviews, all sorts of online and workshops, trying to build scenarios, rich pictures of the future, but informed pictures. It's a Delphi process for those of you in futures who understand the methodologies here. But what it's given us is a very interesting and challenging picture. Now, I'm not going to present any of that here, but simply point you, if you don't know, to the website and to the many outputs now happening. Webinars like these, podcasts, there's an excellent open access book on the way, various other things. It's a rich conversation. Please join. But what we particularly want to focus on today is a big challenge around that, because futures don't just happen. I'm a baker. I'm a very bad baker, but I like to bake. And so you start making bread by making dough. And the great thing about dough is you stretch it and you pull it and you can shape it in any way you want when it's still at that early stage. Once you bake it, it's a different story. Then it's fixed. It's the same with any kind of future. At the early stages where we are now, we have the chance to shape it. we can actually intervene. It will be the result of interaction. So whilst we've got some very nice and detailed pictures of future scenarios for 2030 and how we might enable learning around innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, we're still in a position to shape it. And that's important because there are many different perspectives. And that's what we want today to be about, to try and surface some of the viewpoints around this theme and actually open up some conversation. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Jörg and Carsten, and then we'll get started. But one last bit of framing, and the only slide I'm going to use, so hopefully this is going to be a more person-to-person kind of experience, but let me briefly share my screen with one picture, which just summarizes the key areas that Vision has particularly been looking at. So bear with me, this is where we get the technology. And I'm relying on everybody now to tell me they can see it. Can you all see that? Thank you, Carsten. Okay, so what the Vision Project has done is look at this future for all sorts of workshops and other things and identify 9 shifts, 9 dimensions along which significant change is happening and will happen. And essentially using that as a framework to think about how we might act and how we might begin to shape that future. So very briefly, and you can find out far more on the Vision site, there's a big shift in purpose. This is really the question, what's innovation for? And I think we'd all recognize we are moving to a world where some of those grand challenges, those big questions are becoming very important. This isn't just about making money. This isn't just about small scale social change. It's big picture things, it's grand challenges, the shift in the purpose. There's a shift in structure, particularly structure of knowledge, that innovation requires very different knowledge sets to come together, and knowledge not just to reside in places of learning like universities and libraries, but knowledge to move around. And that implies cross-disciplinary, cross-functional, cross all sorts of boundaries. Another shift is how we actually enable that. The collaborative structures which weave those different knowledge and skills players together. So in the past, we've perhaps talked about a university industry divide. We're finding increasing ways of bridging that and getting much more interlinkages, collaboration of that kind. There are big questions about shifts in spaces. I'm still in a university where the dominant model is the classroom. And it's still predicated on students sit down and listen, and I tell them wonderful things. That's changing. That's changing not just in the underlying model, but in the physical environment and the virtual one in which all of this happens. There are big shifts in the spaces. The kinds of skills we're talking about are not simple know-how skills, simple codified skills. That's a part of it. But increasingly, these are soft skills, these are social skills, these are critical thinking, problem-solving kinds of skills. It's a very different skills mix we're seeing as being required in this future world. And part of the Vision process has been trying to understand from the need side, from the demand side, what kind of skills do people need to have to operate effectively in that future world of 2030? That puts a huge challenge on the shoulders of those responsible for communicating. I've called them teachers here for want of a shorthand label, but this is teachers, lecturers, anyone who's involved in transferring the knowledge. And the shift here is hugely from broadcasting, from standing up and blasting out the message, towards much more of a coaching, mentoring, guiding kind of role. And what does that mean in terms of how we operate, how we train, how we as teachers are developed? What comes out in terms of what our learners, our skilled learners actually produce? We're in an era where still examinations and written things probably dominate how a lot of assessment is done. In the future, that's much more likely to shift towards what they can do. They're the doing, the making, the creating of the changes that they're trying to be a part of. And that brings big challenges to the structures that control all of this. The way that universities and other bodies evaluate, the way we certify. Again, this shift from the structures we're familiar with that have served us well, perhaps for hundreds of years, they may well, or as far as the Vision project goes, the suggestion is they are going to shift quite radically. And finally, we need to throw technology into this mix. because technology has incredibly changed the landscape already. We've had a big acceleration due to COVID and the fact we've had to do a lot suddenly online. But behind that, there are so many other technologies which are part of the shift. The move towards artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and many, many other approaches. If you believe Mark Zuckerberg, we might be in a metaverse by 2030, in which the entire thing is done and experienced virtually. Who knows? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now, because what I didn't want to do was give a lecture, nor did I want to reproduce the vision project, but rather, if we think of this as a kind of football game we're about to play or some other sporting event, I'm marking out the pitch. Those 9 dimensions are the sorts of things we want to talk about. I stress that we'd like it to be a conversation, so if you do have ideas and things you'd like to raise, please put them in the chat, and Lucia and I will try and monitor and draw you in. But what I'm now going to do is just ask our 2 proponents to basically introduce themselves. The idea here is that we're going to have, at least to start, a bit like the old Oxford University debates. On the one hand, this, and on the other hand, this, and then let's see what happens in the argument that follows. It should be fun. So I'm delighted to have Carsten Neber from the Rhein-Waal University of Applied Sciences and Jörg Lieber, who was for a long time heavily involved in the world of innovation, not least with Lufthansa Systems, but is now working with Lex Technologies and something of an entrepreneur himself. So practicing what he's been preaching for a long time. But 2 people with a rich heritage and strong views about how this thing might play out. So what I'd like to do is to invite them to introduce themselves and very briefly, for a few minutes, just state their position about this emerging landscape, and then we'll open it up for the live debate. So Carsten, perhaps could we start with you, ask you to just state your position. I'll give you 4 or 5 minutes to set that out, and then I'll hand to Jörg. Over to you, Carsten.
Yeah. Thanks, John, for the great intro and the overview about the shifts. My name is Carsten Neber. I'm a professor of Rhein-Waal University of Applied Sciences in Germany, Kamp-Lintfort. I'm not a baker, I'm a maker. So I like to make things and also make things happen. So I'm not just a professor at this university for usability engineering and digital fabrication. I'm also the director of the Fab Lab, where we really have one of these shifts going on, like changing spaces. We do practice with our students. We invite people, almost anyone, to come to the university. We're very open in having people from the city, from all over the country, come and joining our educational environment and supporting us in thinking in new directions, learning from each other, and so on. So this is at least something I would really like to emphasize. This kind of shift is going on already, at least now at university. I'm also, I would say, an innovator. At least I try to support innovating in some way. I'm not a teacher for innovation management or innovation practice, but we try to learn every day on how to innovate. We support whomever we can in being innovative. Lots of your shifts that you proposed and you've identified throughout the interviews, I could confirm. I would say, yeah, it's going on. Maybe it's not even 2030 that we're talking about. It's already like happening right away at the moment, on time. But I see a big systematic gap, and it's the system, the educational system itself. We, the professors, and maybe any other educator, we are depending on the existing educational system. We have to follow the guidelines, the rules, the, let's say, old way of thinking, which is really prominent almost everywhere. And we are kind of bounded, we are restricted by this system in the way we teach, in the way we even use our resources. The biggest problem I see is not having enough freedom to be flexible anymore. I personally, I have 18 hours to teach per week, besides research, besides student support, besides all the third mission activities I do in the Fab Lab, like being open for any citizen in the vicinity of our university. So this is way too much, and the freedom for new types of teaching. I mean, I try, but the energy I have is limited. And I see this as one of the biggest obstacles, that we're kind of chained by this existing system. And we kind of have to change this in a way to enable new ways of teaching, especially innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship.
Wow, thank you very much, Carsten. There's already some challenging things there. Not least, do we perhaps need to start again? Are our existing structures fit for purpose? This wonderful vision where we need the skills, but Clay Christensen wrote about the disruption in the university world, and maybe we actually are at a time when it's going to be ripe for people to come with completely new models and demolish these structures, some of which have been around for several hundred years, but nonetheless, I think there's some very interesting questions. We will come back. And I've seen quite a few comments already in the chat line and a few heads nodding. So I think you're not alone in some of your concerns there. But can I briefly ask the same of Jörg? Could you just set out some of your position and then we'll get going? And you might want to unmute, Jörg.
That's a good point. Okay, once again, welcome also from my side. Great to be here. Great to be in such a great company. And thanks for the introduction, of course, John. I happen to know John and Carsten actually for about 10 years, more or less, give and take. And I really enjoy working with them. And the reason for that is I've been working in innovation for a bit more than those 10 years. And when we started to introduce innovation in a corporate context, I had been with Lufthansa Systems at that time. In a later stage, I was responsible for digital innovation at Lufthansa for the group and for the group airlines. We found that talking about innovation, and John, I think you framed it perfectly when you said creating value. I always said when someone asked me what is innovation, I always refer to another good friend of mine, and he said, innovation is when the customer shouts hooray. And well, this is right, because you create value. Really looking at this point and trying to understand what you want to do. And we figured that our employees are not thinking in that way. That it was difficult to entice them to get out of their normal working habits and actually trying to do something and create something. And so for the past couple of years, we have been joined in a couple of different EU projects, which always looked into innovation and also how to entice innovation. And I found this quite a good experience. And so looking at what happened during the pandemic and looking at what Vision started off with, looking in the decade for what happens in 2030. There is a great book from Scott Galloway, some of you might know, Post-Corona. And he discussed some of the things, Carsten, you raised in terms of what is the education system and is it still fit for what we need to do? And one thing he points out remarkably well is in this, due to Corona, in this 1 year, we kind of like leapfrogged a decade in terms of how to use technology, how we actually address students. We were all forced more on the virtual side of things. And yes, a lot of those was forced upon us, upon you as lecturers, upon us in the corporate context, upon our students. Not everything worked well. Not everything is preferred. But a lot of things happened at the same time that really, really went well. I mean, just looking at you both, wouldn't it be great? I mean, I would actually feel a lot more satisfied knowing that a lot more of the students or of the people coming into the corporation had a chance to go to one of your lectures. But lo and behold, they are bound to their university and what they are doing there, and the lecturers there. So wouldn't it be great to have that kind of feeling? Now, that bears the question of evaluation. How do you evaluate someone who had participated in a lecture from John rather than the lecture of someone in the university they were actually inscribed in? So there are a lot of things that we have to think about. And just to throw in one more thing, if we, and this is something that's also not originates from me, but it's something that struck a chord within me when we discussed education. And that was basically, if you look back, we came from homeschooling, right? We came from a one-to-one teaching relationship that could have been the parents, and I hope still parents have a lot of role in playing in there, but that has been a home teacher coming to your home. Obviously, that was only for the riches, and that couldn't sustain, and we had to grow that, and that's how our schooling system developed. But what we lost was the one-to-one connection, the real understanding of what actually the other one really understood, and where you really need to cater more in terms of, hey, there is more excitement. Let's go into this field because there is more than just what you see. We just scratched the surface. Don't give up on it. So, and on the other side, something that you are really intimate, passionate about, you don't have to be pushed, but you do it by yourself. So really understanding that you have not the time when you go into a lecture hall with 200 students, you have no clue, you know, what some of the students are feeling. And John, you raised the issue of AI. With AI, I believe we do have a chance to go back to this one-to-one session to understand where the other sitting in front of the screen, and I know it's not so personalized and so on, but it will be more personalized than what you can do in a lecture hall. And giving that possibility attached to and not eradicating the ability of a student coming into the lecture hall and then raising a question to you, Carsten and John, of, you know, this is something where I got stuck. Could you help me here? And I believe that could really drastically solve the problem of a lot of more there is to learn, because I mean, all technology and science grew over time, and we have to learn more. We have to actually kind of like fill in more knowledge into our students, into our people. How do we do that? And that could be a way. So just a couple of thoughts here, and happy to really get started on a conversation.
That's lovely. Thank you, Jörg. Again, some great things. I guess what I sort of take from that, and perhaps I can throw this, think of this as a football game. I'm now about to throw a ball in from the sideline, and you can, both of you, run for it. If I take what you've just said, there's a lot of rhetoric about student-centered in the future. Put the student at the center as the learner, and let them draw what they need to know. And that's very much the sort of thing you were talking about there, Jörg. They're drawing the knowledge and they're being guided in a very individual journey. Now, at the one hand, we have that picture. The other hand, we have the kind of scale that is driving many institutions where classes I teach routinely have 200-300 students in them, because now online you can do that. And the university owns them, and there's a kind of rent from them. So there's an economic motive. There's a big sort of trade-off there between the personalized, student-centered and the high volume mass thing. How do we deal with this? And maybe I just throw one more thing in. We have this kind of weird cycle coming round. The very early days, I wasn't around them, but though I'm quite old, the very early days of institutions like Oxford, they weren't built on students getting lots of focused lectures. They were built on reading for a degree. You went to the library, you read, and then you spent time with your professor, your tutor, exactly as you described, Jörg, in a small group, exploring, guiding. And that, of course, is this now picture that we're seeing in the vision future, which says the teacher becomes the coach, the mentor, ideally one-to-one. So let me throw the ball in now, and I think Carsten may well
catch the ball.
Is AI going to fix this for us, or what else are we going to do? Carsten, over to you.
So Mark, yeah, so absolutely. I see this, it's an omnipresent problem that you're referring to. So I do practice really being a coach for my students. I really try to make this happen. Luckily, our university provides us with the freedom to do so. So we have also some other shifts that you did not mention yet, or we haven't mentioned this context, like this multidisciplinary skills, cross-disciplinary work, and so on. We do have a great solution in our university, I have to say. So in all of our bachelor courses, we have at the same time in each bachelor program a 10 credits course, which is called the interdisciplinary projects. And the students have to work interdisciplinary. And we are being forced to have interdisciplinary teams of students of different disciplines. That's super great and really, really enjoy this. Every winter term, we have these courses, which is really great. And it's different because what we do is really let the students explore certain topics. We guide them. Of course, we teach them in certain aspects, but most of the effort, the work effort is spent on exploration, testing, problem solving, all this, what we are wishing to have in the future. Well, this only works because it is already an established part of our lecture system. The effort to do this is much higher than having a standard lecture with 200 students, including the exams. But even because even the results that the students create in these interdisciplinary projects are, you really have to take a lot of effort to review whatever they did, whether it's the physical system that they've created. You have to kind of test whether it's working under different conditions, the documentations. It's sometimes up to 100 pages of documentation that you have to review just to come to a grade for 15 students. So there's like this, the load that it produces, the effort that it takes to make something like this happen is really exhausting. We all really do it because we enjoy it so much, and the students really profit from this. And we often have companies joining us in these projects. So we also kind of create the link to the industry in the area. So that's really, really amazing, but it is resource exhausting. And again, back to my initial position, this is the problem with the system. This is not being recognized. This is not being covered by the overall organization of the university. And you raised it, John. So there's an economical aspect as well. So I spoke about 15 students per project. So that's the average number, up to 20, maybe 25. But that's not the 600 we have to deal with. So many of these projects have to take place, and it really depends on the empathy and on the passion of us teachers, professors, to make this happen. And we only do because we want. And I can certainly see and understand why some of my colleagues at some time may say, that's just too much. I can't do this anymore because I have so much other things to do. So again, we're in this dilemma. We really push and we really do. And we try to establish many of the shifts already. But the system is expecting something else and something different from us. And also and that's the very last point, even the industry. I mean, great what the students learn. They work on the projects, they get some other skills than just theoretical knowledge. But on the other hand, the industry is asking for this theoretical knowledge. So the more time you spend on this project-based learning, the less you could feed in on this fundamental basic knowledge that is even expected from the industry, so to say.
Well, if I can pick up on this and also come back to John, what you said, I like the idea of the student-focused teaching and that student journey. And Carsten, I know that you like the concept. You basically said that there are limitations to what you can do. Well, first of all, let's go back to what you just raised at the latest point. Even though it has to be a student-focused journey, there needs to be a certain curriculum, and that is kind of what you said with theoretical knowledge. There needs to be a foundation that as a corporation, we can rely on and say, well, if someone comes from university with such and such degree, I know I don't have to tell them, what is this? Because this is the foundation I can rely on and build upon to make him or her a specialist in whatever field we need that person to work. So I believe that individual journey is not meaning that we are just focusing on something someone likes to do. It also has to do with things that everyone needs to learn, because we need that common ground, that curriculum, that overall foundation to build upon. The question rather is how we get to that foundation. And my point was, if you talk to 200 people, which enables you to kind of like, have a certain amount of things you can kind of like transmit. You have no knowledge on the receiving part, whether or not it's being received well, whether or not it's being, and the way you check and balance that is ultimately with the evaluation in the end, and some fail and many pass ideally, and so we get, and this kind of like is what happened in the past. And I'm fully with you that there needs to be a change in the university or the educational system in order to get to a different view and in order to get to a different way of doing things. However, the question that you raised, John, can we do it? I would say yes, we can, with the help of technology. We saw MOOCs and all those things, and we talked about the inverted classroom, where you basically, what you usually would transmit or lecture in a lecture hall, put into really short sequences, so that you even address the limited attention span of everyone in the room with a short sequence, maximum 5 minutes. I know it takes a lot of effort and time to build those things, but those are then the foundation that when your students come into the lecture hall and raise a question, you find out, okay, well, here I wasn't clear enough, and know in order how you then refer back to the question, what you need to change in order to make it better. And over time, I believe that is a way that enables us to do and to transfer that knowledge, that huge amount of knowledge and growing amount of knowledge, into the students, and still have that basic curriculum, but also addressing the need of where we need to be more focused based on the individual needs, and where we can step back. And again, and well, you can call it AI. I don't like necessarily the whole notion of AI, but we have a means to understand nowadays what is the one in front of the screen really, what he or she grasped and what he or she didn't grasp. So what the student really understood and didn't understood. I didn't understand. And that way we can actually focus tasks and practices to enhance where we need more enhancement, and where we see, well, this is already understood. I don't have to do the practice anymore. So I think we can be a lot more individual in this case, and that will help us to enable the individual journeys and help us also to help with the scaling effect. Now, and last but not least, Carsten, you know that we have been working on a couple of projects, and I think those were really marvelous. We learned a lot of students who are great. We had a lot of new insights which we would never come up with if we would have done it internally. And so this is really important. I really like the idea of working with the students in those groups. So this interdisciplinary work is still extremely important. So John, back to you.
No, it's great. Exactly. I think there's a number of strands coming through here, and perhaps I can throw another ball in from the sidelines, but I'm also watching the chat box, and thank you, people. There's some really wonderful comments coming through, and there's clearly a lot of interaction going on. What you've just described is the classic example where students from universities are engaging with real problems in a real context. And Tony Morgan, for example, from Leeds, has been talking about doing something very similar in the UK. Real challenges, multidisciplinary teams, this kind of thing. Now, what we've got then is that, back to the shifts in vision, this collaboration, this breaking down of boundaries and so on. But let me push this to an extreme, and particularly Jörg, perhaps I could start with you, and then Carsten, you come in. Let's look at the demand side. We've talked a lot about universities in particular as the suppliers, but on the demand side, you need skills, and we're likely to need more and more of them in innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship. Is there not a case for saying industry is getting a bit impatient? We have, for example, in the UK, very successful business, James Dyson, with his huge domestic appliance empire. He set up his own universities and very clearly got a model which comes out of his own background in design and design thinking. It's very practical, it's short, it's focused, it's absolutely embedded. Have we reached the point where, you know, we've talked at the one hand of all the problems of universities changing, maybe universities are becoming irrelevant? That's a provocative ball I'm throwing in, but perhaps you can bounce it.
Well, I don't think that, well, I would certainly disagree with the university becoming irrelevant. What we see, at least in Germany, we have the University of Applied Sciences, where Carsten is based, and there is a strong collaboration already with the industry. And those projects Carsten mentioned already give us a chance to address our issues already with the students, and so I believe also the whole learning process is more relevant to the needs of the industry. At the same time, we do have the original universities which are doing fundamental research, and as much as I believe in focused research for industry issues, I truly believe that we need to have universities focus on fundamental research, because those fundamental things, if you don't have entities looking after fundamental research and also a government and a society funding those fundamental research, we will be losing out in the long run, because then, yes, we will be a lot more focused on what the industry needs, but the leapfrog that we need every once in a while, and that fundamental research is always the foundation, will not be there. And you came initially also looking at the pandemic, and I think that is a very good example for that, because all the huge success of the mRNA vaccination and is based on fundamental research that has been funded from the society in all different countries, and then was used for then of course company and research for application, and luckily we were in a stage where this was applicable already in a couple of companies, so that we have that vaccine available in such a short time. But without the fundamental research, the 20 years prior to that in fundamental research, we wouldn't have been able to even discuss whether we can go back to university. And our fear that if we are throwing everything on, and I like the idea, but if you throw everything on the corporate side and do only corporate kind of like led research, we lose that ability. And I wouldn't like that idea. But Carsten, I'm not sure, but what do you think?
Well, yes, thanks for the ball. So, of course, universities are not irrelevant. I do see the universities, I just sketch a picture. So on the one hand side, I see the universities. Let's just say, okay, we have the University of Applied Sciences, we have the universities, and both are doing teaching and research. And we do research many companies are not able to do. So what we create on new knowledge is given back to the society, is given back to the industry in some way. So everything, not everything, but a lot of our work is being published. That's also a measurement of the efficiency of the university, the number of publications. So we are going to publish the knowledge that we gain from research, but at the same time, we feed it back into the teaching. And both types of university in Germany, Europe, whatever, do this differently. Yeah. So the core universities are focusing on fundamental research. They do research on fundamental aspects and then feed it back to the teaching aspects. Academia is the focus. Whereas we, as University of Applied Sciences, are more focusing on the industry, ideas, interests, aspects, and so on. So our research is more applied. That's why we're called University of Applied Sciences. So, but at the end, it feeds back to the society in some way, and also to the education system. And that's why every other kind of educational institution which provides additional knowledge to anyone, which is super great. I really appreciate that there's so many additional schools of whatever topic, which is super great. But this on top, I would say, what I've learned in my study time was like analytical thinking, problem solving, and not just theory, which I can read in a textbook. Of course, I've learned many things which I may not even use today. Yeah, that's one of the biggest complaints you always hear. But at the end, it shapes your thinking in some way, and that's the key. And that's still the reason why I believe the universities are necessary. And there's another issue. Education should, and in Europe we have a good established system, is open to anyone. And not every additional course or private university that is offering something is affordable to anyone. So universities in general, not for every country, are open to a broader audience, I would say.
There's some really rich stuff coming out here. I'm also go back to my football analogy, a little bit like the referee. I'm looking at my watch because the game is slowly, I'm afraid, coming to a final. But may I just draw something out from this? Because it seems to me we're talking about the student at the center. We're talking about the student moving, and we've had a lot of discussion about them moving to work on live projects in live contexts, and possibly going back the other way. This flow could be two-way. And we're also talking about what they carry. What is the knowledge that they're being given from an awareness of the fundamental research through to many things? And it feels to me this speaking very much to some of those themes that Vision has been drawing out from the workshops, this blurring of the lines, this changing skill mix, not saying that we don't need the knowledge, but we may need to add to it. I was struck during this week. We've had a lot of fuss in the UK about the COP and all the big world-changing stuff going on in Glasgow. But behind the scenes, there was a rather nice feature in the Times about education. And it was looking particularly at the example of Estonia. And basically, Estonia has again come top of the PISA assessment, this OECD's, this international student assessment. In other words, how well is the education system actually working to deliver skilled citizens into the future? Now, you could argue it's a small country, you can do a lot. You could also say there's a lot of experimenting going on. And I was very struck by a quote, which was in one of the interviews from somebody quite high up in the Estonian system, talking about knowledge. Knowledge is important, but in the end, you need those 21st century skills: critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration. Learning's about learning from each other and with each other. Now, that seems to me to speak a lot about what hopefully you still get in universities as an experience, even if some of that these days has to be online, but it's also about the kind of skill mix we want to transmit. I'm going to, however, pause there, get my whistle ready to blow, but I've got time for just one more bit of play. It's nearly Christmas. And so I'm going to play the role now of the Christmas fairy and allow both Jörg and Carsten one magic wish. So if I were to ask you both one thing that might really move us forward to that positive future we can see. We've talked about many of the barriers and the existing limitations, but if you could do one magical thing, what would it be? Jörg or Carsten, whichever one of you picks the ball up first.
One magical thing. Interesting question, and we haven't discussed it. But well, I truly believe that, and this comes back to my experience. I truly believe everyone excels if you do something you're really passionate about. And so it would be great if we would be more geared to understand what someone is really passionate about and really figuring out how we can enhance that person on that pathway where this passion is. And again, that goes back to where I believe we need to go back to more a one-on-one relationship in some type or form. I saw too many places where people or a person was kind of like forced into and performed remarkably well, but not happily so. And I believe if we could shift that, and if university and our educational system would enable our children, our kids, to understand where their passion lies and really strive into a field for that passion, that would be a remarkable thing and would move us a lot much faster forward than many of the things we might have discussed and might otherwise wish for. So not sure whether that's a real magical wish, but this is something I think if we could strive for something like that or had a solution on this one, that would be great. So Carsten, what's yours?
Carsten.
So mine would be something like a time machine. Because very often, I think all of us think, if I would have known this before, I would have done this or that. And I very often realize that students start studying without exactly knowing why and what for. Mm-hmm. And let's say there's a huge amount of students that have this eye-opener point in time where they say, okay, this is where what I want to do in the future. Many don't, but let's say most of them do have this momentum. And I wish to have something like a one semester time shift course in which they kind of fast pace learn essential aspects that just enable them to come to this idea, conclusion, whatever you want to call it, knowing what they aim for. Because once you have this, and some students have this earlier in the program, they know what they want to do, and then they carefully not just listen, they work, their work style, their pace, whatever, everything is different. They become passionate. That's what you said, Jörg. It requires this momentum. And whatever technique, idea exists to drive this in a very early stage of studying, that would be perfect. Maybe you should spend 2 semesters on mission finding, I don't know, before you then start doing the core of your study, because this would be great, because then you have students become, not just students, even us maybe become more efficient.
Absolutely. In
the way of teaching. That would be great.
Lovely. A lot of passion in both those statements. I think channeling passion may be one of our watchwords. I'm afraid the referee is now going to blow his whistle. I'm sorry. It's a great match. It's probably a draw, so we may have to have a rematch, which might be nice. Can I just close for a couple of points? This has been recorded, and do take a look, because what's been going on in the background in the chat box is some wonderful contributions, links, other ideas. Thank you everyone for joining in that conversation as well. And it feels like this is one we want to keep going with. But for now, can I pause at least? Can I say some thank yous to Lucia, who's been working tirelessly in the background, organizing and channeling everything. Otherwise, this just wouldn't happen. To Jörg and to Carsten for their very provocative and useful insights that have got this conversation, kept this conversation going. Also to our dear friend Karina, who unfortunately wasn't at the last minute able to join us, but this webinar was actually her idea. So thank you for that, Karina. Hopefully you can join the next one. But for now, folks, I'll blow my whistle. You'll be able to watch the recording, and certainly you'll be able to look at more of the discussion in the Vision Project. And please join in, because we want to keep this conversation going. For now, though, thank you very much.